You've been lied to. Not maliciously, not by some shadowy cabal pulling strings behind a curtain. Something more subtle than that, more pervasive. You've been lied to by the shape of the story itself. For thousands of years, across every continent, in every tradition, in every culture that ever put chisel to stone or pen to parchment, human beings have been reaching for the same thing. They called it different names: the Philosopher's Stone, Amrita, the elixir of immortality, the Holy Grail, the Tao, Moksha, the kingdom of heaven, Gnosis, enlightenment, the great work. What if those weren't metaphors? What if they weren't myths? What if they were instructions, encoded in the only language that survives the collapse of empires? The language of symbol. Here's the problem with sacred knowledge. It's expensive to preserve. Empires burn libraries. Conquerors rewrite cosmologies. Religions that rise to power tend to eat the traditions that came before them, or absorb them quietly, stripping the operational instructions and keeping only the poetry. So what survives? What survives is what can't be killed, because it doesn't announce itself. It hides in story, in ceremony, in architecture, in paintings commissioned by popes who thought they were getting one thing and received something else entirely, from initiates who had learned over centuries that the outer garment must always conceal the inner teaching. Look at the painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. You've seen it 1,000 times. You've seen it on coffee mugs and greeting cards. You know what you're told it means: God giving life to man. But a neurosurgeon named Frank Meshberger published a paper in 1990 pointing out something that had been hiding in plain sight for 500 years. The shape Michelangelo painted around God is not decorative. It is a precise, anatomically correct cross-section of the human brain. The neck cloth beneath the angels traces the brainstem. The drapery follows the cerebral sulci. Michelangelo, who illegally dissected human corpses to understand anatomy, was not painting God giving life to man from the outside. He was painting the mind giving birth to the concept of God from within. That's not theology. That's heresy. That's the left-hand path, hidden inside the most famous ceiling in Christendom, and nobody noticed for 500 years. Let's do something that historians rarely do. Let's put the traditions side by side and look at what they actually share, not what separates them. Every major tradition describes a process, not a belief, a process. A series of stages that transform something base, crude, and undeveloped into something pure, luminous, and imperishable. The Western alchemists called these stages nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, and rubedo. Blackening, whitening, yellowing, reddening. Decay, purification, illumination, perfection. The Hindu Tantric traditions describe the awakening of Kundalini energy, a force described as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine, which rises through 7 centers of the body, transforming the practitioner at each stage, culminating in union with pure consciousness at the crown. The Kabbalistic tradition maps 10 Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, 10 states of emanation from raw existence to pure divine unity, and the initiate must work their way through each one, not believe their way through, work. The Taoist alchemists of ancient China spoke of Neidan, which means inner alchemy, where the practitioner refines the 3 treasures: Jing, Qi, and Shen, or essence, energy, and spirit, through a process of internal transmutation until they achieve what they called the immortal fetus, the perfected inner self. The Egyptian mystery schools, the source tradition that fed into Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and likely early Gnosticism, initiated candidates through a ritual death and resurrection. The candidate would lie in a sarcophagus for 3 days. They went in as one thing, they came out as another. You've heard that story before. You heard it in Sunday school. 3 days in the tomb, death and resurrection. The initiate becomes the Christ, the Anointed One. But here is the thing the Sunday school teacher didn't tell you. That structure, the death, the descent, the transformation, the return, is not unique to Christianity. It is the template, the recurring pattern found in every mystery tradition on earth. Osiris, dismembered and reassembled. Dionysus, torn apart and reborn. Odin, hanging on the world tree for 9 days to receive the runes. Inanna, descending into the underworld and returning. Persephone, Orpheus, Gilgamesh. The same story, over and over, in cultures that never met. Either this is the most statistically improbable coincidence in human intellectual history, or these stories are all pointing at the same real thing. So what is the real thing? I want to be careful here, because the temptation at this point is to give you an answer, a clean, satisfying, conceptual answer that you can nod at and walk away from. What I will tell you is what the evidence points toward, and what we'll be building across this series. The alchemists were not idiots. The ones we're talking about, Paracelsus, Flamel, John Dee, the author of the Emerald Tablet, these were among the most educated, sophisticated minds of their eras. When they wrote about transmuting lead into gold, they were using a technical vocabulary that had a precise inner meaning. Lead, the densest, most inert metal, was their symbol for the uninitiated self. Weighted down by habit, conditioning, fear, desire. Asleep, reactive, mechanical. Gold, incorruptible, untarnishable, neither created nor destroyed, was their symbol for the perfected self. The self that had been through the fire and emerged changed. Not improved, changed in kind, not just degree. The philosopher's stone was not a stone. It was not a substance. It was a state, and more than a state, a being. The human being who had completed the work. The stone that transforms base metals into gold was the completed initiate, who transforms everything they touch because they have transformed themselves. This is what they encoded into mythology, into architecture, into art that hung on the walls of churches where the profane could see it but not read it, into stories that children were told as fairy tales, not knowing that Cinderella's transformation from ash-covered servant to radiant being is a perfect Negredo to Rubido arc, not knowing that Sleeping Beauty, asleep in the tower, is the dormant higher self, waiting for the kiss of consciousness to awaken it. They hid it everywhere. Because the knowledge itself is not dangerous. It is the readiness to receive it that is rare. Now, I said this channel is left-hand path. That needs explaining because the phrase gets misused constantly. The right-hand path traditions, mainstream religion, exoteric spirituality, most of what you'd find in a yoga studio, approach the great work through surrender, dissolution of self, the drop returning to the ocean. The goal is union, and the method is submission. The left-hand path says, the drop does not disappear into the ocean. The drop becomes the ocean, while remaining distinct. The self is not dissolved, it is perfected, individuated, crystallized. This is the satanic in the true sense, not the theatrical sense. Lucifer, the light-bearer, who refused dissolution, who said, I will not kneel, I will become. In Hindu Tantra, this is the Vamachara path, the left-handed way, which works with transgression, with the forbidden, with the body rather than against it, to accelerate the same transformation that the right-hand path seeks through renunciation. Same mountain, different faces. But the left-hand path version of the Philosopher's Stone is the one with teeth, because it does not promise the reward of non-existence. It promises the reward of total, irreducible, sovereign selfhood. And that is a far more uncomfortable promise to make, because it places the entire weight of the work on you. There is no grace to carry you. There is only the work. Over the course of this series, we're going to pull this thread through everything. We're going to watch Walter White descend into Negredo and ask whether he ever achieved the rubedo, or whether he mistook the stone for something it wasn't. We're going to sit with the Emerald Tablet, line by line, perhaps the most information-dense 14 sentences ever written, and decode what Hermes actually meant. We're going to look at why John Dee's Enochian system, far from being the delusion of a credulous old man, is a rigorously structured technology for a very specific cognitive state. We're going to follow the spinal column up the caduceus, the kundalini, the Jed pillar of Osiris, and ask whether the entire cartography of transformation is actually a map of something that happens in the human nervous system. And at the end, not of this episode but of this series, we're going to arrive at an answer to the question that every tradition was circling around. What is the Philosopher's Stone? Not as philosophy, not as metaphor, as a real, achievable, operational thing that human beings have been finding their way toward for 10,000 years. The work begins now.